video lecture in AP Psychology. This video lecture doesn't really go specifically with certain pages in our textbook. Rather, it is the big picture understanding of the approaches or perspectives in the field of psychology. In this course, our goal is to better understand why you are the way that you are, why your friends and family act and do and behave in ways that they do. And in this field, there are many different perspectives or approaches that look at understanding and explaining human behavior. So we are going to look at the 7 major perspectives and their corresponding beliefs, because this is going to lay the framework for this course. My hope is by the end of this video lecture, you will see how somebody's singular behavior can be looked at and understood from multiple different angles and lenses, depending on the perspective in which you are trying to explain it. So we will be covering the sociocultural perspective, evolutionary perspective, humanistic, behavioral, psychoanalytic, cognitive, and biological or biophysiological perspective. Also, sometimes you hear it called neuroscience perspective. The earliest form or the earliest perspective is known as a psychoanalytic perspective. And if you were to have one visual in mind as to when I asked you to visualize therapy, let's say, the visual that might come to your mind is an old man with white hair sitting on a chair and somebody laying on a couch right next to that person, and that man with the white hair saying, well, tell me how you feel about that. That might be your visual of what psychology is or what therapy is. And that visual is very deep rooted into the psychoanalytic perspective. Sigmund Freud, who is the founder of this perspective, is kind of what we call the father of psychology. He created our very first perspective. He also created our very first form of therapy or way of treating others who struggle with mental illness. His perspective has kind of stayed around the longest because of his historical context, as well as because the perspective is very difficult to prove true or false. So it kind of has just stuck around because of that. But when Sigmund Freud puts on his goggles and he looks at examining and understanding human behavior, he looks at what we can't see. He focuses on something called the unconscious. So conscious is what you're aware of all around you. The unconscious is all those things that are happening below or beneath your awareness. So he believed that a lot of our behavior is driven by this unconscious. And these unconscious drives, motives, feelings stem from repressed trauma that occurred during our childhood. So he thought that our childhood played a really large role in making us into the person that we are today. And that traumatic, repressed memories from our childhood impact us today, even though we can't consciously put our finger on it. We can't consciously say that we know it's because of that repressed trauma. Rather, that is happening because it lies in our unconscious. So when trying to, let's say, understand somebody's behavior as to why they are experiencing sadness, why they seem to be sad or upset all the time, Sigmund Freud would say that they had some sort of repressed trauma from their childhood. They've unconsciously banned that. They've repressed it, but it's seeping out. So there might be things that happen in their world that remind them of some trauma from their childhood that they're not aware of. And it's causing them to express those emotions that they had as a child. But the key is they have no memory of that. They have no recollection of that event occurring. So a lot of our feelings are below our conscious awareness. The biggest support I can give for this perspective is if you've ever woken up one morning and you're really sad, or you're really angry, or you're really frustrated, or you have some emotion, but you can't put your finger on why you have that emotion or where that emotion came from, that would be a lot of evidence for that psychoanalytic perspective that would say, well, there's something unconscious going on. There's something in your environment that has triggered you, that's reminded you of something, that's causing you to have these emotions, but you don't know what that is because you're not consciously aware of what's happening. The second perspective is known as the behavioral perspective. If you've heard of any other name in psychology, it might be Ivan Pavlov before, or heard of Pavlov's dogs, or a man named Albert Bandura, or John B. Watson. Those are some names from the behavioral perspective. But the behavioral perspective believes that our personality, our traits, our characteristics are a result of kind of the actions and consequences that come from those things. It's kind of like if you do A, then B is going to happen. And so the behavioral perspective says, well, we are a result of the consequences that occurred to us. So we are a result of the rewards or the punishments or the associations that we have made throughout our lifetime. And so if for some reason we are getting a reward for the behavior or personality trait that we have, we're going to continue to have that personality trait. If we are punished for that personality trait, we are going to no longer have that behavior, that personality trait. It also looks at how we learn through observing other people. How do we look at our parents and act similar to the way that they do? Or how do we model our behavior off of a friend or another family member who we might look up to? But the behavioral perspective, every time they look to understand human behavior, says, well, it is because there's been consequences that have led them to have those traits and characteristics that they have. They've been rewarded for those behaviors before. They've been punished for the opposing behaviors before. They have an association that's leading them to those characteristics and traits. Our third perspective is known as the humanistic perspective. Some names tying with this humanistic perspective are names like Abraham Maslow, who you might have heard of in your health class. Also a man named Carl Rogers. This perspective, when looking to understand and explain human behavior, looks at us as these humans that have a potential for growth and that we are constantly trying to strive and better ourselves to fulfill and reach all the needs in order to be the best possible version of ourselves. So this perspective has a very positive connotation. It believes that humans are born good and we are born wanting to seek our best possible versions of ourselves. We are born wanting to be self-actualized. We're born wanting to be a fully functioning individual. So according to this perspective, we are constantly driven by a set of needs. Let's say from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are constantly driven to try and kind of check mark and fulfill all of those needs in order to reach the best possible version of ourselves. And so a person's personality or traits or characteristics are a result of something, some need, some human need that's not being met. Maybe they're missing love and belongingness in their environment. Maybe they have a low self-esteem. Maybe they don't have safety and security and a shelter and a place to live. Maybe they don't have an environment that promotes growth where they have people in their world that accept them. So this perspective believes that our personalities are truly a result of whether or not our needs are being met and we are able to reach the best possible version of ourselves. The next perspective is the cognitive perspective. The cognitive perspective, there's some names tying with this, such as Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis. These two individuals believe that our personality, our traits, our characteristics are a result of our thought pattern, that our thoughts, our interpretation, our inner dialogue, those things are what impact our emotions, our feelings, our personality, our characteristics, our actions. A lot of times in life, we believe that situations or events cause us to have feelings that we have. But in actuality, the cognitive perspective says that's just not true. It's our thoughts and our beliefs and our interpretations of others' behaviors that cause us to feel the emotions that we feel. So if you have a personality trait that you are, really crabby or really outgoing or really shy or whatever it might be, it's a result of your thoughts and inner dialogue. If you walk into a situation and you are really positive and you believe that everybody there could possibly be your friend and that this is going to be a positive experience, well, then you're going to feel that way and you're going to act that way. If you believe that you don't have anything worthy to add to a group of people and you believe that nobody's going to like you no matter how you interact with them, well, that's going to impact how you feel, and it's also going to impact how you act. So our inner thoughts and our inner dialogue impact our personality, our characteristics. The next perspective is the evolutionary perspective. This perspective looks solely at survival of the fittest, the idea that the personality traits that aided in our ancestors' survival are the ones that stay. So those individuals that had certain traits and characteristics that allowed them to be able to survive, those were the traits that were passed on to us today. So if we look at individuals who maybe show their emotions readily, are very, like you can see their emotions, they wear their emotions on their sleeves. Perhaps if you look from the evolutionary perspective, way back in our ancestral age, those that displayed their emotions sought out attention, sought out others to be with them in order to support them. And therefore, they had kind of a group around them to help them survive. Therefore, those individuals who have that trait and characteristic was passed down because it had allowed our survivors or our ancestors before us to survive. The sociocultural perspective, this perspective looks at how our society impacts who we are. So our family, our friends, the club, the school, the city, the state, the country that we live in, the activities we partake in, all of those things impact who we are. We are a part of the culture that we are a part of. So the people at your church community that you are with, those individuals impact your personality. Your family unit impacts your personality. The friends you choose to surround yourself with impacts who you are. The club or the sport that you're on, those individuals impact your personality or who you are. And the final perspective is the biological perspective. This perspective is used mainly by psychiatrists, and it's based on the idea that our personalities, our characteristics are a result of genetics. They might be a result of our brain functions, our brain abnormalities, our DNA. Anything looks at the biological to explain the psychological. So our personality and traits are a direct result of that chemical or that hormone in our brain or that DNA strand or that portion of our brain that's working or not working. Those are what lead us to have the personality and traits and characteristics we have today. So again, that is your very first video lecture, looks at the big picture. How would each of these different approaches help to understand and explain why you are the way that you are? What would they look at? How would they try and understand? How would they research? How would they explain to somebody else as to why you have the traits and characteristics that you have today?